Hi everyone. So this is the final lesson. I guess it's not really a lesson because this is an actual assessment. So this is the assessment for Unit 2, Imperialism. So everything has been kind of leading up to this. The way I designed the unit again was kind of to focus on specifically the final assignment. I actually designed the final assignment first and kind of worked my way backwards from there. So you'll see a lot of ties to previous things from the previous lessons, as it should look. Um, so yeah, I'll just go straight into it. So first off, the lesson goal, I guess the assessment goal, demonstrate your ability to compare the forms of imperialism we learned throughout the unit, specifically on how each type impacted or impacts, because the past and then also the present, the economic, political, social lives of the subjugated through a final discussion. So relating it straight back to that essential question I started off with. And the key terms, basically everything we used in the unit. So the agenda, they look at the discussion norms, and then I divided up the discussion into three separate phases. First phase is comparing systems of imperialism. So they do a lot of cause and effect and what's it called, comparison. And then phase two, they look at imperialism today. So that's where we focus more on the Chinese imperialism, and I ask more questions about that. And then phase three is probably the hardest phase. It's mostly centered on discussion prep, where they have to read an article about TikTok. It's a little bit of an outdated article now, just because some more things have happened with TikTok, but it's from an interesting author with an interesting perspective. And I feel like they'll have a lot of fun reading it. I'll show you what I mean when we get there. So as I showed in the last, I guess I didn't show that in the last video. So for the discussion prep, they're supposed to fill out this worksheet, and then and they'll also be turning in this worksheet. But this worksheet is how they're going to prepare for the actual discussion, so they can do well in the actual discussion. So I'll show you the worksheet. First, it's like a little chart, so they can kind of summarize some of the things that have already happened. So description and causes and method of imperialism, and the far left column, and then on the rest is political, economic, and social, so they can talk about it in terms of the colonizers or the empire builders, and then also those subjugated. I hope there's like a section for both. So I have some for the Spanish Empire. The British Empire is probably going to have the most information, just because that's what the lesson spent probably the most time on. And then modern China. This will probably be the cleanest part of their chart, just because it'll be the most recent stuff you guys covered. And then here's what the actual questions that we go over during the final discussion. So I'm going to recommend to them that they actually like answer these questions themselves before, so they know what they're going to say in the chat and what, or like when we actually talk out loud. And then I also have an important reminder where I tell them for each of these discussion categories. So discussion category 1, 2, and 3. Provide at least one conversation starter, an additional question, a topic you wish to discuss, with your own thoughts on it, etc., so we can have a fruitful discussion. So this is the bare minimum of what we're going to cover. Again, like I said, I hope that my students can be a little bit more ambitious, and actually bring some of their own topics and interests to light when relating it to the content of the class and the articles of the class, and the sources that we read in class or viewed in class. However, I understand that I'm still kind of a little bit fuzzy on the sophomores' ability levels. So I do need to have like a lot of preparation material, and I can't just give them be like, oh, just discuss what happened in the class. So I do have it a little bit structured. So for phase one, comparing systems of imperialism, which forms of imperialism has been most harmful and why. All of these questions don't have like a specifically right answer. Obviously, that's kind of like how I format most of my discussions. I try to make the questions in that manner. So even for this part, they can say like a certain phase of British imperialism. They can say Spanish imperialism. They can say modern Chinese imperialism. And then obviously they need the evidence. Which form of imperialism have been the most beneficial? Why? Again, they can say like any of the phases of British imperialism, Chinese imperialism, or Spanish imperialism. I guess I didn't do a great job painting Chinese imperialism in the best light, so that might be a downfall of this curriculum, I just realized. So I probably need to work on maybe giving a more balanced view of Chinese imperialism. Well, not a balanced view, because I think the views I did give were balanced, but maybe some countervailing views than the views I gave. And then finally, which factors were the most important in influencing nations to pursue a policy of imperialism? Why? That's really focusing on that cause column and kind of comparing the different systems of imperialism and the different causes. So you can see like economic reasons, a lot for the Spanish and the Chinese and modern China, and then kind of some for the British Empire. But then there's also ideological reasons like God, kind of like God again, civilizing the savages for the British Empire, and then modern China. Again, I probably need to give a more countervailing view for stuff outside of the economics, but I did want to focus on the economics a little bit more. And then kind of political reasons, empire for the sake of having an empire to compete with other empires that are growing at a rapid rate that can challenge the security of the British Empire. Modern China would probably argue the same, that they're just trying to kind of control the region against other nefarious powers that are trying to influence an area of the world that they shouldn't, such as the USA. And then the Spanish Empire, political. There's like a lot of different. I mean, you guys know how to do this, but that's just kind of what I was saying. How they can have multiple different answers. Imperialism today, which historical forms of imperialism are the closest to the modern forms of imperialism today? So they can relate it to like the modern Chinese imperialism. This is also where I hope they have some background prerequisite knowledge on maybe like different forms of imperialism that are happening today. Like America isn't painted in the greatest light for being an imperial power today. Obviously, we don't go over too much of American imperialism in this unit, but that's going to be like a key component of of Unit 2 for the freshman curriculum. So they might still remember or just have some prerequisite knowledge of a different form of imperialism, American imperialism. And then what dangerous problems exist among the current imperialistic policy conducted by China? That's a little bit of an easier question. I try to have like a lot of questions per category and a lot of opportunity to answer the questions. You'll see the rubric because they're required to do certain things per phase. Do other countries practice imperialism policies today? How do these compare to modern Chinese imperialism? So that's to kind of prompt them if they weren't able to kind of make the connection to the US, they can kind of make the connection to the US or other countries in the world. But maybe like you can talk about modern Russia with like Georgia and Ukraine just in the 21st century. And then also, can imperialism be a benevolent policy in today's world? What would this type of imperialism look like? Because there's a lot of authors who argue that imperialism, at least certain time periods of imperialism, specifically with the British Empire, was actually a pretty benevolent, positive policy, kind of comparing the British Empire's former colonies to other empires, former colonies, kind of establishing these beneficial institutions, bringing technology and knowledge to these regions of the world. But of course, these people have to acknowledge and reconcile with the fact that a lot of bad things came with it as well. So maybe like a new form of imperialism. What would this positive form of imperialism look like? Maybe we'd have to rebrand it to call it something not imperialism just because it has such a dark past and history. But again, these kind of questions are meant to be a bit provocative and for people to come at them from different angles so we can see a bunch of different ideas. That's the whole point of discussions, at least. And then the TikTok discussion article. I'll actually show you guys the TikTok article I have. Oh, this is kind of bad. I'll make sure to post it in this lesson, but I have it in the previous lesson. I'll probably hyperlink it right here. But I have it right here as well. The TikTok article. It's from one of the authors I really like, but I think he went a little bit too far in some places, and I feel like my students will think so as well. So most of the time, at least me as a teacher, I try to give them sources that I think are pretty balanced and sources that not that I agree with, that's probably not the right way to put it, but sources that are not like too provocative or anything, sources that they'll probably be able to relate to and kind of agree with a little bit more. But this article, I feel like they won't agree with at all. And I hope they're able to bring their grievances of this article to the table. Because I do agree with some aspects of the article. And I do think that this person usually writes some pretty good articles. But I thought this one was a little bit off. But he did make some good points, which is good. It's great for discussion and prep because, like, I agree with some of it. I don't agree with some of it. Here's why I agree. Here's why I disagree. And I hope my students are able to bring the same type of and like the same type of preparation and conversation starters to this discussion. And I obviously made it related to something that they love. They always like to ask me about like what's up with TikTok, what's going on with TikTok. So this kind of tells us what's going on with TikTok. So it says that the U.S. won the Cold War by exporting its values, and China has a similar plan for Cold War II. So he's very provocative, and he talks about how addictive TikTok is. He talks about it as the opium, a digital fentanyl, kind of relating kind of the opium wars in China to modern day times, and how China is trying to import or export this digital fentanyl to the U.S. To spread their values and whatnot. Yeah, so it's like super provocative, and it doesn't really make sense when you look at his premise. But I do think he says certain things about TikTok that will kind of inform the students on what's happening with the situation and also some of the worries that people have. But I do think there's enough flaws in his arguments, and this just because he doesn't understand the technology as well as the students would, because he's like an older author. That I think the students will be able to pick apart, and they can actually have some time and opportunity to show that, hey, like I can actually contribute positively to this conversation, because I do come in with some certain positives that this guy doesn't have, specifically that I actually use TikTok and I understand how it works a little bit more. So again, there's a lot of good points in this article, but I think his overall argument is a bit flawed and a bit limited in scope. And then I think, but we'll see, I might be over ambitious, but I think that my students will be able to bring some of the limitations of this article to the table and talk about it as well. So in saying that, when we go back to the discussion prep worksheet, I asked them, do you agree with the author's main argument? Which I anticipate a lot of them will say no. Some of them might say yes, though, because I agree with certain aspects of his main argument. And then what factors might limit the author's credibility in writing this type of article? He kind of talks about how he doesn't really understand technology, which is kind of funny. He was like reading, or he was looking at his son's TikTok and stuff like that. So he doesn't really understand it as well as maybe someone their age might. And then which of his 3 points of evidence best supports his argument? He actually lists it kind of bullet point, I think. So he really breaks down his main thesis pretty effectively, which I agree with point 1 and 3, I think, pretty substantially. But then I think piece number 2, I thought was kind of weak. So they get to kind of evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of his argument with this part of the discussion. Yeah, so that's what the TikTok article is for. And again, I'll actually like hyperlink it right here so they can click on it. I'll show you the discussion rubric, and then I'll show you the final page of the discussion reflection worksheet. I'm sorry if I'm going out of order. I feel like this is a good way to show you guys, but maybe I'll change it up. You guys can tell me in the future if this is a good way to show you my lesson plans. So I just have 3 categories: excellent, proficient, unsatisfactory. And if they totally drop the ball, then they'll get 0 points. And I have like a couple things. So adherence to discussion norms, that's that discussion norms worksheet I showed in the previous video. Discussion prep worksheet, like when they turn it in, how completed is it and how in-depth is the completion. The TikTok article annotations, they're supposed to answer questions on the TikTok key ideas, supporting evidence, questions on the article, opinion on the article, that kind of stuff, which is kind of like a mini assignment I'll make for them. Discussion topic 1. Oh yeah, so this is how I break it down. That you get different scores for how they perform in each phase of the discussion. So they're supposed to contribute basically at least once for every phase. So that means that every student will contribute 3 times through the discussion. I might have to alter how this happens a little bit, but it's going to be pretty hard to perform extremely well in each phase just because limited time and we're kind of on this online format. So I have done certain things to account for that. But I mean, what separates the categories, I guess, I only have a minute, so I'll hurry up. They contributed to the conversation while providing ample evidence. So that's like the solid actual contributions with tying things to the article or different things that the kids were talking about. And then finally, a discussion reflection, which I'll go over really quickly before I run out of time on this free app that I have. So when you go back to the discussion reflection worksheet, they're also supposed to answer these questions in just a summary kind of paragraph format. This is for the students who aren't as effective in discussions. They're a little bit more shy, so I do account for that in the rubric to try to help them out a bit. So the basic questions we go over are these. You guys can read them. Sorry, I only have 15 minutes. And then finally, for the discussion, oh man, I'm losing it. basically they just have to write it, and that's how they're going to get scored. Thanks for your time. Have a good one. Let me know if you have any questions.